They thought I was invisible. My mother-in-law's laugh cut through the air, sharp as glass, when her eyes landed on my dress. "Cheap," she said, just loud enough for the table to hear. I felt every glance burning into me, the weight of their judgment pressing down like chains. But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I smiled, because what they couldn't see was the truth stitched into every seam, a secret waiting to be unveiled. In a month, this very dress would be on the glossy cover of Vogue, and their silence would be my sweetest revenge. When I first walked into their mansion, I thought I had stepped into another world. Marble floors stretched endlessly, chandeliers sparkled above me like captured constellations, and the air smelled of roses and wealth. My husband squeezed my hand gently, as though to reassure me, but my heart still pounded. I wanted to believe this was the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. Acceptance, family, belonging. For a fleeting moment, I let myself imagine that I could fit here, that maybe the walls of judgment I had felt would crumble into warmth. The dinner table gleamed with crystal glasses and polished silver. Conversation flowed with practiced charm, the kind of effortless ease that came from generations of privilege. I sat among them, quiet, observant, telling myself I was welcome. Then my mother-in-law's eyes drifted downward. She saw my dress. Her lips curved into a slow, sharp smile, and in one deliberate breath, she struck. "Cheap," she whispered, but it was loud enough for every guest to hear. The laughter that followed was polite, almost rehearsed, but it sliced through me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, as though every gaze in the room weighed me, judged me, dismissed me. I forced myself to sit straighter, to breathe evenly, but inside I was collapsing. For one suspended second, I wanted to vanish, but instead I smiled. I smiled because I had learned long ago that silence could be sharper than words. I smiled because the woman across the table had no idea what I carried within me. And I smiled because, though her words pierced, they lit a fire I had buried too long. The night wore on, her barbs weaving themselves into casual conversation. Each remark chipped away at the image of perfection I had briefly held. It wasn't a dinner. It was a performance, a stage where I was cast as the outsider, and she relished every line. What no one in that glittering room knew was that once I had belonged to another world. I had walked backstage at fashion shows, adjusted hems under harsh spotlights, watched my designs glide down runways. I had tasted recognition, then lost it when betrayal cut deeper than applause could heal. A colleague I trusted stole my sketches, passed them off as her own. The industry's doors closed in my face and I walked away, vowing never to return. But the craft never left me. Each night in my tiny apartment, I stitched, cut, and shaped fabric, pouring pieces of myself into every seam. The dress they mocked tonight wasn't from a bargain rack. It was mine, designed, sewn, and perfected in silence. As the dinner ended, my mother-in-law leaned close, her perfume suffocating, her tone drenched in victory. "Next time," she murmured, "at least try not to embarrass him." I bit back the words pressing at my lips. Instead, I held her gaze and let my smile linger just a heartbeat longer than necessary. In that smile was a promise she could not read. The following morning, my phone buzzed, a notification, then another. My chest tightened as I opened the screen. Her laughter, my dress, captured in perfect clarity on a guest phone and uploaded to TikTok. Within hours, the clip exploded, spreading like wildfire across feeds, gathering millions of views. The comments were merciless at first, strangers repeating her word, cheap, hashtags mocking me, strangers laughing at a woman out of place in a house of wealth. I wanted to hurl the phone across the room, to crawl back into silence, but then I scrolled further, and there, tucked between the cruelty, a shift began. "Wait," one user wrote, "that dress actually looks amazing. Cheap looks better than half the designer gowns out there." Another, Her smile. She knew something. I'd wear that dress. The tide was turning. What my mother-in-law meant as humiliation had opened a door she couldn't control. People weren't just laughing. They were curious. Curious about me, about the dress, about the story behind the woman who didn't flinch when mocked. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. For the first time in years, I felt the old spark, the one I thought had died with betrayal. It flickered alive, fed not by vengeance but by possibility. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." For days after the dinner, the house was quieter, though not kinder. My mother-in-law's smirk lingered in the hallways like perfume that refused to fade. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she had broken me, and the family followed her lead. I remained silent. To them, silence meant weakness. They mistook my composure for surrender, the stillness of my eyes for defeat. But silence is not the same as submission. Silence can be a blade, hidden until the moment it cuts deepest. Every snide comment, every roll of the eyes, every whispered insult at the breakfast table, I logged them all away, not in anger, but in patience, observing, collecting, waiting. What they did not know was that I had been underestimated before, and each time, that underestimation became my sharpest weapon. Meanwhile, the clip of my cheap dress continued its life online. What began as mockery twisted into something else. Strangers stitched the video, some mocking, but others defending me. The hashtag "darn cheap dress" surfaced, first as ridicule, then slowly as reclamation. Young women posted their own outfits, tagging them proudly with the same phrase. It was bizarre, surreal even, watching strangers fight battles on my behalf. For the first time, I wasn't just the woman being laughed at. I was becoming a symbol. One night, while scrolling, I saw it. A tweet from an influencer with millions of followers. "That dress isn't cheap, it's art. Look at the lines, the structure. Whoever made this knows design." My breath caught. The thread below was filled with agreement. Designers breaking down the cut of the fabric, stylists speculating on where it came from. They were looking closely, too closely, and suddenly the balance shifted. What had been a weapon against me was slipping out of my mother-in-law's grasp. She wanted humiliation. Instead, she had handed me exposure. I sat in my small room that night staring at the glow of my phone screen, my heart torn between fear and exhilaration. Part of me wanted to close the door again, to retreat, to vanish before they discovered too much. But another part, the part I had smothered for years, wanted to step into the light. I unlocked the old cabinet in the corner, its wood scratched from years of neglect. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, lay my hidden world. Sketchbooks filled with pencil lines and ink smudges, rolls of fabric waiting to be shaped, dresses, coats, unfinished pieces of myself that no one else had seen. My studio was modest, just a converted spare room with a sewing machine and dreams I never dared speak aloud, but it was mine. I pulled out the dress I had been working on before the wedding, a flowing piece of silk with a neckline sharp as a secret. My fingers traced the seams, remembering the nights spent bent over the machine, the quiet hum of creation soothing me when the world felt unbearable. A knock at the door startled me. It was Maya, my oldest friend, a photographer who had been my confidant through every rise and fall. She stepped inside, eyes sweeping over the room, widening as she took in the pieces I had kept hidden. "Claire," she whispered, "why are you hiding this?" I shook my head. No one cares, not anymore. That world turned its back on me. Her gaze was firm. The world doesn't decide when you stop. Look at what's happening online. People are already searching for you. They're curious. You can't waste this moment. Her words lodged themselves in me, heavy but undeniable. Over the next few days, I found myself drifting back into the studio, dusting off old designs, sketching new ones. Each stitch felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Still, hesitation coiled around me like smoke. I had been betrayed once. What if it happened again? What if stepping forward meant opening myself to destruction all over? But the noise outside was growing louder. The hashtag had reached news outlets, fashion blogs speculating whether the cheap dress was secretly designer. The comments buzzed with theories. Who was I? Where did the dress come from? Why hadn't anyone seen it before? I stayed quiet, but the silence was becoming louder than words. Then, late one night, as I scrolled through yet another avalanche of notifications, my screen lit up with a direct message. The name froze me in place, a stylist from Vogue, one whose reputation I had admired for years. 3 words blinked back at me. "Is this your work?" My heart slammed against my ribs. The walls of fear and doubt wavered, trembling under the weight of possibility. The game had changed. By the time the next family gathering came around, the clip of my so-called cheap dress had already become a cultural wildfire. Strangers debated about me at dinner tables across the country, while hashtags multiplied like sparks. Yet within these gilded walls, nothing had changed. My mother-in-law's smile sharpened when she saw me, a predator relishing another chance to strike. She poured herself a glass of wine, eyes glinting as she raised her voice just loud enough for the room. "Still clinging to those little hobby projects of yours?" she asked, her tone drenched with sugar. The guests chuckled, some awkward, some complicit. My husband stared at his plate. I didn't defend myself. Instead, I leaned into the silence, letting her performance echo in the air. What she didn't know was that silence was now my stage. Because the more she sneered, the more the world outside turned against her. Every insult she spat became another reason for the internet to rally around me. People were furious at her cruelty. What she thought was victory was actually fuel for a storm she couldn't control. Meanwhile, in the privacy of my studio, I began my own game. I uploaded photographs, details of fabric, silhouettes against light, the curve of a seam that hinted at mastery. No names, no face, just art. I wanted to see if the world still cared. Within hours, the images were shared, dissected, praised. By the next day, one of my anonymous posts had exploded. 10 million views, a flood of comments calling the design haunting, revolutionary, a dress with a soul. My pulse raced as I scrolled, the old thrill surging through me. For the first time in years, my work breathed beyond the walls of secrecy. But my growing visibility did not go unnoticed. My mother-in-law's suspicion sharpened. She watched me with hawk-like intensity, probing for weakness. When she learned of the Vogue stylist's interest, her mask cracked. Fear flickered in her eyes, quickly smothered by rage. She acted swiftly. My bank accounts, tied to the family's oversight, suddenly froze. Household staff no longer answered my calls. My husband, caught between loyalty and cowardice, offered little resistance when his mother insisted on discipline. They thought financial suffocation would end me, but they didn't know. I had already moved beyond their reach. In a quiet cafe downtown, I slid a contract across the table to the Vogue representative. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of resurrection. The stylist smiled, her eyes alight with recognition. "Your work speaks for itself," she said. "We want your collection. Anonymous for now, if you prefer, but it needs to be seen." I signed. With that pen stroke, I reclaimed the life they thought they had buried. Weeks later, as society scrolled through their feeds, Vogue dropped the announcement. The most anticipated new collection of the season comes from an anonymous designer whose first piece has already taken the internet by storm. The accompanying cover image silenced me. There it was, my dress. The one my mother-in-law had mocked, the one she had used to humiliate me. Now it stood framed in glossy perfection, declared iconic by the world's most prestigious fashion magazine. The internet erupted. Hashtags surged, fan accounts sprang up overnight, and the public clamored to know who I was. They didn't yet have my name, but they didn't need it. My work had spoken, And in my mother-in-law's house, the silence was deafening. She stared at the cover, her face drained of color. This was no longer a private battlefield of insults and control. This was war, and I had shifted it onto a stage where she had no power. Her claws would dig deeper now, I knew. She would not surrender easily. But for the first time, she understood what she was truly up against. The night of the gala arrived with a weight I could feel in my bones. Flashing cameras painted the evening sky in bursts of white light, and the red carpet shimmered beneath my heels. For weeks, speculation had swirled about the anonymous designer whose work had ignited a cultural storm. Tonight, the secret would end. As the car door opened, I stepped out, no longer in the shadow of a wealthy family's disdain, but as myself. Gasps rippled through the crowd, reporters surged forward, and questions flew in a chorus of urgency. My dress, another of my designs, caught the light and commanded silence. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Inside, the air buzzed with recognition. Influencers whispered, editors pointed, and celebrities craned their necks to see me. I caught sight of my husband in the distance, stunned, his mouth slightly open, and beside him, my mother-in-law sat frozen, her flawless mask faltering for the first time. Then came the reveal. As Vogue's editor-in-chief took the stage, the room hushed. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate the genius behind the collection that has redefined fashion for a new era. Ladies and gentlemen, allow us to introduce Claire." A spotlight found me, pulling me forward. I stood beneath its brilliance, my name echoing through the hall. Applause erupted, thunderous and unstoppable. Phones rose into the air, capturing the moment the world learned the truth. The woman mocked for wearing a cheap dress was the mind who created it. The applause carried me higher, but the true climax came moments later. Vogue unveiled their next cover. My face, my dress, my name stamped across glossy paper, immortalized as the designer who turned humiliation into triumph. The very dress that had once been a weapon against me was now the banner of my rebirth. And the cameras found my mother-in-law, her face, pale beneath layers of makeup, her smile rigid as porcelain. The internet would not miss this reaction. The days that followed were merciless. Reporters unearthed the clip of her mocking me, replaying it alongside my cover image. Headlines screamed, "From cheap to chic, the dress that shamed a socialite." Online, she was christened the face of cruelty, toxic in-law, a symbol of arrogance and ridicule. The more she tried to control the narrative, the more it slipped from her grasp. Her public apologies were dissected, her motives questioned, her reputation shredded thread by thread. She was no longer untouchable. She was a spectacle, and I didn't have to lift a finger. The internet fought my battle for me, their fury carving justice out of her mockery. Where once I had been the silent victim, now she was the one under siege. At home, the family scrambled to repair the damage. My husband pleaded with me to fix things, to remind the world that family unity mattered. My mother-in-law tried softer tones, weaving false affection into her words, hoping I would shield her. But I owed her nothing. She had written her legacy herself. I remained silent, my power amplified by restraint. The more I refused to engage, the more people admired me. They saw dignity in my stillness, strength in my refusal to stoop to her level. What she once mocked as weakness had become my greatest weapon. The crescendo came at the fashion show. The runway glittered under blinding lights, the air electric with anticipation. Models walked draped in pieces I had once only dreamed of seeing on stage. Each design was a fragment of me, pain stitched into fabric, hope woven into seams, fire hidden in folds. As the finale ended, applause surged like a tidal wave. I stepped onto the runway, heart pounding, body alive with adrenaline. Cameras flashed, chants echoed, and for a moment I felt as though the entire world was breathing with me. Then I saw her, front row. dressed in opulence but stripped of authority. My mother-in-law sat stiffly among the VIPs, forced to witness what she had tried so hard to destroy. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant the roles reversed. She was the outsider now, powerless, drowning beneath the weight of her own venom. I let my gaze linger on her for just a second longer than necessary, not with anger, not even with revenge, with recognition. She had become the ghost of a story she no longer controlled. The crowd rose to its feet, applause echoing like thunder, but all I heard was the silence between us, the silence that said everything she never wanted to admit. The weeks after my fashion show felt like a fever dream. My name was everywhere. Splashed across magazine covers, whispered at elite dinners, dissected on morning talk shows. Orders flooded in, investors clamored for meetings, and emails stacked higher than I could read. The world was finally seeing me, not as a wife defined by her husband's family, but as an artist in my own right. For a while, I floated on the tide of triumph. But success is rarely a crown without thorns. The fashion industry, always hungry for novelty, began gnawing at me as soon as they had lifted me up. Critics accused me of being a one-hit wonder. Designers whispered that I didn't deserve the spotlight, that I hadn't paid my dues. Words like imposter and lucky break echoed through the same halls that had once shut me out. The applause that had carried me now sounded like footsteps chasing me, demanding more, faster, better. Contracts piled on my desk, each more demanding than the last. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. I sketched until my hands ached, stitched until my eyes blurred, always terrified that if I paused, the world would move on without me. At home, the cracks deepened. My husband, once supportive in silence, now resented the shadow I cast. "Do you even care about this family anymore?" he asked one night, his voice sharp. "Or is your career all that matters now?" I wanted to scream that family had never cared about me, that only now, when I was untouchable, did they pretend to. But the words stuck in my throat. He left the room before I could find them. The headlines turned crueler with each passing week. One morning, as I sipped bitter coffee, I saw it sprawled across a major newspaper. "Claire is a fraud?" My heart dropped. The article questioned my legitimacy, hinting that I had stolen my designs, that I was nothing more than a clever actress wearing borrowed genius. The sting of betrayal I had once endured came rushing back, sharp and raw. I tried to dismiss it as rumor, but whispers grew into storms. Investors pulled back, wary. Journalists sniffed around for scandal. And beneath it all, a shadow from my past stirred. Her name was Evelyn. Once she had been my colleague, my confidant, until the night she stole my sketches and passed them off as hers, leaving me to rot in silence while she thrived. I had buried her betrayal deep, convinced I would never face her again. But now she had returned, her hand unmistakable in the slander spreading through the industry. It was Evelyn who seeded the stories, Evelyn who leaked evidence that the designs weren't mine. Fake sketches surfaced online, labeled with her initials, dated conveniently before my own. She positioned herself as the wronged visionary, reclaiming what she said I had stolen. The fashion world, fickle and merciless, listened. Suddenly, doors that had swung open slammed shut. My team fielded panicked calls from buyers threatening to cancel orders. My name, once celebrated, was now laced with doubt. Each lie Evelyn spun spread like ink in water, staining everything I had built. I fought to breathe, to steady myself, but fear coiled around my ribs. Was I about to lose it all again? The empire I had clawed into existence now trembled like glass beneath a hammer. The final blow came in the form of an email. $1 million contract, my most lucrative deal yet, vanished in a curt message. Due to recent concerns about originality, we are terminating our partnership. I stared at the screen, numb, my chest hollowed. the weight of loss crushing me from the inside. All the nights of labor, all the silence I had endured, all the triumphs that had lifted me high. It felt as though they had been yanked away in one brutal instant. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, but I couldn't bear to look. The headlines were already writing my downfall, and Evelyn's smirk haunted the edges of my mind. For the first time since this began, I wondered if they had won, if all my fire had been for nothing. The night after I lost the contract, I sat in darkness. The glow of my phone, the only light in the room. Headlines screamed betrayal, my inbox overflowed with cancellations, and Evelyn's face appeared on talk shows, painting herself as the wronged visionary. I had been here before, cornered, dismissed, erased. For hours, despair pressed down on me like a suffocating weight. Maybe this was how it ended again, with silence swallowing me whole. But then, something inside shifted. I thought of every woman who had messaged me since the beginning of the Da Course cheap dress saga, women who had said they, too, had been mocked, dismissed, overlooked. I thought of how my silence had once protected me, but now it threatened to destroy me. Enough. Silence had been my shield, but truth would be my sword. The next morning, I set up my phone in the studio. I pressed Go Live. At first, only a few hundred tuned in, then thousands, then millions. My voice was steady as I laid everything bare. I showed the original sketches, dated years before Evelyn's forged copies. I revealed emails, contracts, and timelines. I played recordings of conversations, the evidence I had once gathered silently while others mocked me. Piece by piece, I dismantled the lies, holding nothing back. Evelyn didn't just steal my work years ago, I said, looking directly into the camera. She tried to steal my voice again, but I won't let her, not this time. The comments flooded in. Support, outrage, solidarity. Within hours, the hashtag #ShingJusticeForClaire trended worldwide. Journalists picked up the story, fans dissected every frame of my live stream, and the narrative shifted violently. Evelyn, once smug in her deception, found herself exposed under the blinding spotlight of truth. That evening, Vogue released a statement. They stood by me unequivocally. Claire's vision represents the future of fashion, the editor declared, and we will continue to support her artistry. The weight that had crushed my chest lifted, replaced by fire. But victory alone wasn't enough. I wanted to turn my pain into something greater, something that would outlast a dress, a magazine cover, even a scandal. Weeks later, I announced the launch of the Cheap Dress Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women dismissed by their families, workplaces, and communities. What began as an insult had become a banner of empowerment. The media embraced it, but more importantly, women from all walks of life embraced it. They wore their own cheap dresses proudly, posting photos, telling stories, reclaiming their dignity. My mother-in-law's silence was deafening. For months, she had wielded her words like weapons. Now, stripped of power, she offered me the first apology of her life. It wasn't public, but it was real. She bowed her head, and in that moment, the power between us shifted forever. Strangely, I felt no desire for revenge. Where once her cruelty had burned me, now it only reminded me of how far I had risen. From hatred came compassion, not because she deserved it, but because I deserved peace. On the night of my next show, the atmosphere buzzed with something deeper than fashion. Models walked not just in designs, but in statements. Each dress carried a story, stitch by stitch, a tribute to resilience, to women who had been silenced, to voices that would no longer be ignored. As I stepped onto the runway to thunderous applause, I paused, letting the moment wash over me. Cameras flashed, chants echoed, but this time, I wasn't thinking of them. I was thinking of every woman who had once believed she wasn't enough. I looked straight into a camera lens, my reflection mirrored on screens across the world. I smiled, steady, unshaken. If they call you cheap, I said softly. Prove them priceless. The crowd roared, but more than that, I felt something greater, a shift, a transcendence. My story was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, mocked, or silenced. And as the lights dimmed and the applause swelled, I knew one thing for certain. I had not only survived the fire, I had become it.